My daughter-in-law laughed when I spoke. Now she cries at the court. That's what my life became. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for even a second, feel that this sounds familiar, just please leave a like and subscribe. It will help me continue opening my heart. My name is Edith Wallace. I'm 77 years old and I live in a small apartment in Chicago, where the wind cuts through your bones in winter, and the summer heat makes you grateful for every breath of air conditioning. I wear cardigans that I iron every morning, even though no one notices. My hands shake now, not from age, but from the weight of carrying other people's lives for so long that I forgot I had one of my own. For 25 years, I believed that love meant giving everything, everything. My retirement savings, my dignity, my voice at the dinner table, my place in family photos where I stood just slightly outside the frame, always making room for others, never taking up space. It was a Tuesday evening in October when my world cracked open like an egg hitting concrete. I had spent the afternoon baking Kyle's favorite apple pie, the one with extra cinnamon that took me 3 hours to make because my arthritis slows everything down. I ironed my best cardigan, the navy blue one with pearl buttons that my late husband Robert bought me for our 40th anniversary. I even put on lipstick, something I rarely did anymore since Robert passed. I was sitting in my living room, pie cooling on the kitchen counter, purse ready by the door, when my phone buzzed. A text message from Kyle, my son, my only child, the boy I raised alone after his father died when he was 16. Mom, Madison doesn't want you at dinner tonight. Please don't come. 14 words. That's all it took to erase decades of motherhood. I read it once, twice, 3 times, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something that didn't feel like a knife sliding between my ribs and finding my heart with surgical precision. Madison, my daughter-in-law of 15 years, the woman who had actually laughed, 3 weeks earlier when I tried to tell a story about Claire's first steps. "Oh, Edith," she had said, not even looking up from her phone. "Nobody wants to hear those old stories." But Kyle had just smiled and changed the subject. My son, who used to hang on every word I said when he was small, who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms and beg me to tell him stories about when I was little. I didn't move from the couch for an hour. The pie grew cold. The cardigan I had ironed so carefully developed wrinkles where my hands gripped the fabric. Outside my window, I could see families walking home from work, children running ahead of their parents, laughter floating through the evening air like music I was no longer invited to hear. The house they lived in, their beautiful colonial in Lincoln Park with the red brick facade and the garden I helped plant, that house existed because of me. $110,000 from my retirement account. Money. Robert and I had saved for 30 years, living on pasta and canned soup some weeks, so we could put away every possible dollar for our golden years together. "It's an investment in our future, Mom," Kyle had said, his hand warm on my shoulder, his smile the same one he used to give me when he wanted extra dessert. "You'll always have your own corner in our home. Always." That corner had apparently been demolished without notice. I walked to my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept the envelope marked Kyle in my careful handwriting. Inside were documents, receipts, bank statements, a paper trail of love that apparently meant nothing. $18,000 for his failed technology startup that was going to revolutionize online shopping. $9,500 for Madison's dental work because their insurance didn't cover cosmetic procedures. $7,200 for Claire's private school tuition because the public schools just weren't good enough for our little genius. And the monthly payments. Oh, the monthly payments. $3,800 every month for their mortgage. $850 quarterly for Madison's luxury SUV lease. Grocery money when times were tight. Vacation funds for trips I was never invited on. Utility bills when Kyle's commissions fell short. 174 separate payments over the years. 174 ways I had said, "I love you." And I couldn't remember the last time any of them had said it back. That night, I made chamomile tea in the mug Claire had painted for me in 2nd grade. crooked letters spelling "World's Best Grandma" in purple glitter that still shed tiny sparkles every time I touched it. I sat in Robert's old recliner, the one I couldn't bring myself to get rid of because it still smelled faintly of his aftershave, and held the indent of his body like a hug I could climb into. I thought about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days stretching ahead of me like an empty highway. Who was I if I wasn't Kyle's mother? If I wasn't Claire and Tommy's grandmother? If I wasn't the woman who solved their problems with her checkbook and her silence? I fell asleep in the chair, still wearing the navy cardigan, still holding the cold mug of tea, dreaming of a different life where love didn't have a price tag, and where being wanted didn't require being useful. The next morning, I woke with a crick in my neck and the bitter taste of regret in my mouth. The navy cardigan was wrinkled beyond saving, but I kept it on anyway. It felt like armor now, like the last piece of the person I used to be. I made coffee in the kitchen where Robert and I had shared thousands of mornings, where we planned Kyle's future and dreamed about grandchildren who would visit us on weekends and holidays. The morning light streaming through the window felt different now, thinner, colder, like it was struggling to reach me through invisible barriers I hadn't noticed being built. I opened the envelope again, spreading the papers across my small dining table like evidence in a crime I was only now beginning to understand. Each receipt told a story. Each canceled check was a memory of love offered and never returned. The first payment was from 1998. Kyle was 24, fresh out of college with a marketing degree and big dreams. He wanted to start his own advertising agency, but banks wouldn't loan money to someone with no credit history and no collateral. So I became his collateral. $18,000 from the CD Robert and I had planned to use for a trip to Ireland, the homeland his grandmother had left behind with nothing but stories and hope. "I'll pay you back with interest, Mom," Kyle had promised, sitting in this very kitchen, his eyes bright with ambition. "This is just a loan, a business investment. We're going to be rich, and then I'll take care of you forever." Forever lasted exactly 8 months. The business failed. The clients Kyle thought were guaranteed never materialized. The partner he trusted disappeared with half the remaining money. Kyle came to me crying, looking exactly like he had at 8 years old when bullies took his lunch money. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I know you and Dad needed that money for your trip, but he never paid it back. And I never asked. Because what kind of mother demands money from her heartbroken child?" The Ireland trip became a photograph on the refrigerator, a picture I cut from a travel magazine and put up to remind myself that someday, when Kyle got back on his feet, we would go together. The picture was still there, faded and curled at the edges, a monument to dreams that became donations. Madison entered our lives 2 years later, a tornado of blonde hair and bright laughter who swept Kyle off his feet, and into a wedding that cost more than Robert and I had spent on our entire first year of marriage. She was beautiful in the way that made people turn their heads on the street, but her beauty came with an expensive maintenance schedule that somehow became my responsibility. The dental work was just the beginning, $9,500 for veneers and whitening, because Kyle's career depends on his wife looking perfect at company events. I wrote the check while sitting in my dentist's waiting room, postponing my own root canal because my insurance wouldn't cover the full cost, and I had just spent my medical savings on Madison's smile. Then came Claire. Sweet, perfect Claire, born with Kyle's eyes and Madison's determination. I held her in the hospital and promised to give her everything I could. What I didn't realize was that everything would become literally everything. Private school tuition, $7,200 a year because public schools were beneath our standards, according to Madison. Dance lessons, piano lessons, art camp, swimming lessons, tutoring, SAT prep courses. Every opportunity Claire needed to succeed, I funded. Not Kyle, not Madison, me. "She's going to be special, Mom," Kyle would say, bouncing Claire on his knee while I wrote another check. "She's going to change the world, and she'll remember that her grandma made it all possible." Would she, though? Because by the time Claire was 10, she barely looked at me during family gatherings. She was always busy with her phone, her friends, her activities that I paid for but wasn't invited to watch. The mortgage payments started in 2010. Kyle and Madison had been renting an apartment in Wicker Park, but they wanted to buy a house. Build equity, they said. Create generational wealth. The only problem was their credit. Kyle's failed business ventures had left him with a score that made lenders nervous. Madison had student loans that gobbled up most of her income from her part-time job at a boutique that sold handbags worth more than my monthly grocery budget. So I became their co-signer, their safety net, their personal bank. $3,800 a month, every month, for 7 years and counting. Money that came directly out of my Social Security check and the small pension Robert had left me. Money that meant I shopped at discount grocery stores and wore the same 5 cardigans in rotation and hadn't bought myself new shoes in 3 years. But it was worth it, I told myself, because family takes care of family, because love means sacrifice, because someday, when they were secure and successful, they would remember all I had done, and I would finally have my place at their table. The Hawaii vacation broke something inside me that I didn't even realize was still whole. $12,000 for a family trip to Maui. "We need this, Mom," Madison had explained over lunch at a restaurant where the salads cost more than I spent on food in a week. "Kyle's been so stressed at work. The kids need to see the world. This vacation will bring us closer together as a family." As a family. But when I asked if I was invited, Madison's laugh was like glass breaking. "Oh, Edith, you wouldn't enjoy it. All that sun and walking. And the hotel rooms are so small." I watched their photos on Facebook from my living room, scrolling through images of my son and grandchildren building sandcastles and swimming in crystal-clear water, while I ate generic soup and wondered if the heating bill would stretch until my next Social Security check. In every photo, they looked happy, complete, like a perfect family that had never needed me at all. Was I used? The question whispered itself in the dark corners of my mind, growing louder each time I wrote another check, each time I smiled and said, "Of course," when they needed something else. Each time I hung up the phone after hearing about their latest adventure that I had funded but wasn't invited to share. Was I used? Or was this just love? And if it was love, why did it feel so much like dying? The weeks that followed that canceled dinner invitation became a masterclass in invisibility. I started paying attention to things I had trained myself to ignore for years. The way Madison's eyes would glaze over when I spoke. The way Kyle would check his phone mid-conversation with me. The way my grandchildren had been taught to hug me with the mechanical politeness reserved for distant relatives they barely knew. My 77th birthday came and went without acknowledgement. I spent the morning at Robert's grave, telling him about how quiet the house had become, how my phone hadn't rung in 5 days. I brought him daisies, his favorite, and told him I was starting to understand why he'd always said Madison looked at me like I was something she was trying to wash off her hands. That afternoon, I sat in my kitchen with a store-bought cupcake and a single candle, making a wish I was afraid to say out loud, that someone, somewhere, would remember I existed. The wish didn't come true, but something else did. Something that shattered what was left of my faith in the people I had spent my life serving. It was a Thursday evening when I discovered the truth. I was organizing my bank statements, preparing for tax season, when I noticed something strange in Kyle's account activity. You see, when I co-signed for their mortgage, they had given me online access to monitor the payments. "For transparency, Mom," Kyle had said, "so you can see that every penny is going where it should." What I saw instead was a trail of lies that made my hands shake so violently I had to set down my reading glasses. The mortgage payment I had been sending them each month, it was being deposited into their checking account, yes, but it wasn't going to the bank. Instead, there were charges for restaurants I'd never been to, shopping sprees at stores I couldn't afford to walk into, spa appointments and golf club memberships and weekend getaways. They had been using my money I scraped together from my modest Social Security and Robert's tiny pension, to fund a lifestyle I was never invited to enjoy. But it got worse. I found Madison's social media posts from their work conference in San Francisco. Except it wasn't a work conference. It was a luxury vacation, complete with 5-star hotels and Michelin-starred restaurants and shopping trips to Union Square. The photos showed them laughing, holding hands, looking like newlyweds on their honeymoon. The bill had come to $4,000. Money that came directly from the mortgage assistance I sent them each month, while I ate canned soup and wore sweaters with holes in them because I couldn't afford to replace them. I kept scrolling, each image a fresh wound. Madison wearing a designer dress that cost more than my monthly food budget. Kyle drinking wine that probably cost more than my electric bill. The children with new toys and clothes and experiences that I had unknowingly funded while being told I was too old to enjoy similar luxuries. But the final blow, the one that broke me completely, was a photo from last week, the night I was uninvited to dinner. They weren't having a quiet family meal at home. They were at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, one of Chicago's most expensive restaurants, celebrating Kyle's promotion with champagne that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The caption read, "Finally a quiet family dinner. Sometimes you need to keep it small and intimate. Their blessed bitter family double memories. Quiet, family, intimate. Everything I wasn't invited to be part of." I stared at that photo until my vision blurred, and then I did something I hadn't done since Robert's funeral. I broke down completely. Not the quiet, dignified crying of a woman who had learned to suffer in silence. This was ugly, body-shaking sobs that came from a place so deep I didn't know it existed. I knocked over my coffee mug. The ceramic shattered against the kitchen floor, spreading dark liquid across the linoleum like a stain I would never be able to scrub clean. The sound echoed in my empty apartment, and I realized it was the first real noise I had made in weeks. Even my grief had been whispered. I crawled down to clean up the mess, my knees protesting against the hard floor, and as I picked up the broken pieces, I thought about how perfectly they represented my life. Sharp fragments of something that used to hold warmth, now dangerous to touch, impossible to put back together. That night, I sat in Robert's chair with a box of tissues and a revelation that felt like ice water in my veins. I had been paying for my own exclusion. Every check I wrote, every bill I covered, every emergency I solved with my bank account, it all funded a life I was deliberately kept away from. They didn't just tolerate me, they profited from me. And the more I gave, the less they valued me. Because why cherish something that comes for free? I opened my laptop, the ancient thing Kyle had bought me 5 years ago to stay connected, and logged into my bank account. The automatic transfers I had set up were scheduled to go out again in 3 days. Mortgage assistance, car payment assistance, grocery money, emergency fund contributions. 174 ways I had said, "I love you" to people who saw me as an ATM with a heartbeat. My finger hovered over the cancel payment button for 20 minutes. Because canceling meant confrontation. It meant admitting I had been played for a fool. It meant acknowledging that my only child saw me as a resource to be managed, rather than a mother to be loved. But most terrifyingly, it meant risking the complete loss of the only family I had left. What if they cut me off entirely? What if I never saw Claire and Tommy again? What if this was as much love as I was ever going to get? And I was about to throw it away over money. I closed the laptop without making any changes, and went to bed still wearing yesterday's clothes, still smelling like spilled coffee and broken dreams. But something had shifted inside me. A small, quiet voice that sounded surprisingly like Robert's was whispering a question I was finally ready to hear. "Edith, honey, when did you start believing that love had to be bought?" For the first time in 25 years, I didn't have an answer. 3 days later, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in decades. The morning light seemed brighter, sharper, like someone had cleaned windows I didn't realize were dirty. I made my coffee in a new mug, the old one was still in pieces in the trash, and I sat down at my laptop with the kind of purpose that comes from finally understanding the difference between love and exploitation. I canceled every automatic payment, every single one, the mortgage assistance that was really vacation funding, the car payment for Madison's luxury SUV, the quarterly deposits into their savings account, the emergency fund contributions that funded their emergencies while leaving me with nothing for my own. 23 automated transfers. 23 monthly reminders that I existed only to give. When I clicked cancel on the last one, my hands weren't shaking anymore. The phone started ringing that evening. Kyle's number flashed across the screen again and again like a fire alarm I wasn't ready to answer. 10 missed calls by 9 o'clock. Then the text messages began. "Mom, what's going on? The mortgage payment bounced. Hello? Are you okay? Why isn't my account showing the transfer? This isn't funny. Call me back. Mom, call me now. I turned off my phone and took a bath. A long, hot bath with lavender Epsom salts I had bought myself for the first time in 3 years instead of sending Kyle grocery money. The water was so hot it turned my skin pink, and I stayed in until my fingers wrinkled like raisins, until the bathroom filled with steam that made everything soft and dreamlike. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. The next morning brought Kyle to my door. Not a phone call, not a text message. He was standing in my hallway at 7:30 in the morning, still wearing his work clothes from the day before, his hair disheveled and his eyes wild with the panic of someone whose safety net had suddenly disappeared. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, pushing past me into my apartment without being invited. "The bank called yesterday. Claire's tuition payment bounced. Madison's car payment bounced. What happened to the transfers?" I closed the door slowly and turned to face my son. Really look at him. For the first time in years. When had he gotten so soft around the middle? When had those lines appeared around his eyes? The ones that came from stress and too much rich food, and the kind of worry that people feel when they live beyond their means. "I canceled them," I said simply. "You what?" His voice cracked like a teenager's. "I canceled the automatic payments. All of them." Kyle stared at me like I had started speaking a foreign language. "Why would you do that? We depend on that money. The kids depend on that money. You can't just—" "Sit down, Kyle." "I don't want to sit down. I want to know why my 77-year-old mother is having some kind of breakdown and sabotaging our family's financial stability." The words hit me like a slap. Breakdown. Sabotage. As if protecting my own resources was an act of aggression rather than an act of self-preservation. "Kyle Michael Morrison," I said, using his full name the way I had when he was 8 and had broken something precious. "Sit down in that chair and listen to what your mother has to say." Something in my tone must have reminded him of the woman who raised him, because he sat. Reluctantly, angrily, but he sat. "I found the bank statements," I began. "I saw the restaurant charges, the vacation expenses, the shopping sprees. I know what you've been doing with the money I send you every month." His face went pale, then red, then pale again. "Mom, I can explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for months? That while I eat generic soup and wear sweaters with holes in them, you've been using my money to pay for luxury dinners I'm not invited to?" "It's not like that." "Then tell me what it's like, Kyle. Tell me why I received a text message uninviting me to dinner on the same night you took your family to a restaurant that costs more than my monthly food budget." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Kyle looked down at his hands. Soft hands that had never known real work. Hands that had learned to expect everything they reached for to be freely given. "Madison doesn't mean to exclude you," he said finally. She has a lot of stress. The kids, her work, maintaining the house. The house I helped you buy. Yes. And we're grateful. Are you? Because gratitude usually includes the person you're grateful to." Kyle's phone buzzed. He glanced at it automatically, and I saw Madison's name on the screen. Even now, even in this moment when our relationship hung in the balance, she took priority over me. "She's worried about Claire's tuition," he said, as if that explained everything. "And what about my tuition, Kyle?" "What? What about my education? Did you know I wanted to take art classes at the community center? Did you know I dreamed of learning to paint watercolors like my mother used to? Did you know I've been putting off dental work for 2 years because every extra penny I had went to your family?" He was staring at me like I was a stranger, like the idea that I had wants and needs and dreams beyond funding his lifestyle had never occurred to him. I didn't know you wanted art classes. You didn't know because you never asked. In 25 years of marriage and motherhood and widowhood, not once have you asked me what I wanted for myself." My voice was getting stronger now, fueled by decades of suppressed frustration. "Do you know what I ate for dinner last night, Kyle? Crackers and cheese. Do you know what you ate? I saw the photo. $30 steaks and wine that costs more than my monthly medication. We didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you did. You meant to keep me as your secret benefactor while excluding me from the life I was funding. You meant to use me. The word hung in the air like an accusation neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Kyle's phone buzzed again. This time he ignored it. What do you want me to do, Mom? I can't change what happened. I can't make Madison different. I want you to leave. What? I want you to go home to your wife and explain to her that the Bank of Edith Wallace is closed. I want you to figure out how to pay your own bills like the 49-year-old man you are. And I want you to think about whether you love me enough to include me in your life, or whether you only love what I can give you. Kyle stood up slowly, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. Anger, fear, something that might have been shame if I was being generous. Mom, this is crazy. You're being crazy. We're family. Family helps each other. You're right, I said, walking to the door and opening it. Family does help each other. It works both ways, Kyle. It includes both people. He walked to the threshold and turned back, his face desperate now. What if we lose the house? What if Claire can't stay in school? What if— Then you'll figure it out, I said, the same way I've been figuring out how to live on crackers and cheese while you ate steak. After he left, I sat in my kitchen and cried again. But these tears felt different, cleaner, like I was crying for the woman I used to be rather than the woman I was becoming. That evening, Claire called. Sweet Claire, now 16 and beautiful, and completely unaware that her grandmother had been slowly disappearing to pay for her life. Grandma Edith? Dad says you're sick. Are you okay? Sick. That's how they were going to explain it. Poor, sick, confused Grandma Edith who didn't understand how families worked. I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm just taking better care of myself. Dad says you canceled some important payments by mistake. By mistake. As if a woman who had managed household finances for 50 years couldn't tell the difference between a mistake and a choice. Not by mistake, Claire. On purpose. There was a long pause. Then, in a smaller voice, Are you angry at us? And for the first time in this entire nightmare, I told the complete truth. I'm disappointed, sweetheart. I'm disappointed that no one in your family seems to remember I exist unless they need something from me. I remember you exist. Do you? When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you visited me without being told to? When was the last time anyone in your family invited me somewhere that didn't require me to pay for it? Another long pause. I don't know. Neither do I, Claire. And that's the problem. The first morning after cutting off all payments, I woke up to something I hadn't experienced in decades. Financial breathing room. For the first time in 25 years, my Social Security check was mine alone. No automatic deductions. No guilty calculations about whether I could afford groceries after sending Kyle his mortgage assistance. No choosing between my prescription medications and Claire's dance lessons. I stood in my kitchen, still wearing my faded nightgown, and did something radical. I made a grocery list without checking my bank balance first. Real butter instead of margarine. Fresh vegetables instead of canned. Coffee beans instead of instant. A small luxury that felt revolutionary after years of generic everything. The grocery store felt different too. I walked the aisles slowly, reading labels, choosing items based on what I wanted, rather than what I could afford after funding someone else's life. I bought strawberries in December. Expensive, imported strawberries that tasted like sunshine, and reminded me that pleasure didn't have to be practical. At the checkout, the total was $68. 6 months ago, that would have sent me into a panic. Today, I handed over my debit card without fear, without the familiar stomach-clenching anxiety that came with every financial transaction. The cashier was a young woman with kind eyes who looked at me, really looked at me, when she handed me my receipt. I hope you enjoy those strawberries, she said with a smile. They're from California. Perfect sweetness. When was the last time anyone had wished me enjoyment of anything? I drove home with groceries that belonged entirely to me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was worth feeding well. That afternoon, I did something else I hadn't done in decades. I took a nap. Not because I was exhausted from worry, not because I was hiding from my problems, but because I wanted to. I curled up in Robert's chair with a soft throw blanket and let myself drift off to the sound of rain against the windows. I woke up refreshed instead of guilty. The phone rang throughout the week. Kyle, Madison, even Kyle's business partner, who somehow thought it was appropriate to call an elderly woman and demand explanations for financial decisions that were none of his business. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages escalated from confused to angry to desperate. Mom, this is ridiculous. We need to talk. Edith, this is Madison. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Kyle told me about your conversation, and I want you to know that you're always welcome in our home. We love you. Please call me back. Grandma, it's Claire. I'm worried about you. Dad says you're acting strange. Can you please call me? I miss you. That last one nearly broke my resolve. Claire's voice, sweet and concerned, using exactly the right words to make me feel like the villain in this story. I sat with the phone in my hands for 20 minutes, thumb hovering over her number, before I realized what was happening. This was how it always went. First, Kyle would try anger. When that didn't work, Madison would try manipulation disguised as love. And when all else failed, they would use Claire. Innocent, beautiful Claire, who had no idea she was being weaponized against her grandmother's newfound independence. Instead of calling back, I went to the community center and signed up for watercolor classes. The instructor was a woman named Sarah, probably in her 60s, with paint-stained fingers and an infectious laugh. She looked at my registration form and smiled. First time painting, Edith? I wanted to learn when I was younger, but I stopped myself before launching into the familiar litany of sacrifices and responsibilities that had filled my life. Yes, first time. Well, you're going to love it. There's something magical about watching colors blend on paper. It's like capturing emotions. She handed me a beginner's kit. Brushes, paints, paper, all in a neat little box that cost $47. The old me would have calculated how many days of groceries that represented. The new me just said thank you and felt excited about creating something beautiful. My first painting was terrible. A crooked house with windows that didn't match and a sky that looked more purple than blue. But it was mine. Something I had made with my own hands for my own pleasure, without having to justify the cost to anyone else. I hung it on my refrigerator next to the faded picture of Ireland I had never visited. That evening, I made myself a real dinner. Chicken breast with herbs, fresh green beans, a glass of wine I had bought without guilt. I set the table properly. Cloth napkin, real silverware, a candle I lit just because I wanted to see the flame dance while I ate. I was halfway through my meal when I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had eaten dinner sitting down, using actual dishes, taking my time to taste each bite. How many meals had I eaten standing at the kitchen counter, distracted by worry about someone else's problems, rushing through my own nourishment so I could focus on theirs? The silence in my apartment wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful, full of possibility instead of absence. I was washing dishes when my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, knocked on my door. She was holding a plate of homemade cookies and wearing the concerned expression of someone who had noticed changes. Edith, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I heard raised voices the other day, and I wanted to make sure you were all right. Mrs. Chen's cookies were still warm, chocolate chip with the perfect balance of crispy edges and soft centers. We sat at my kitchen table, two elderly women who had lived long enough to recognize crisis when it knocked on the door disguised as family drama. You seem different, she said gently, her accent softening the edges of her words. Lighter, somehow, but also sad. I told her everything. The years of payments, the lies, the restaurant photos while I ate crackers for dinner. She listened without judgment, occasionally shaking her head or making small sounds of disapproval that somehow validated every hurt I had been carrying. My daughter-in-law used to do something similar, Mrs. Chen said when I finished. Not money, but energy. Always needing me to babysit, clean, cook, solve problems. I was grandmother, maid, and therapist all in one. Never just a person worth visiting. How did it stop? I moved to a senior community in Arizona for 6 months. Told them I needed to help my sister recover from surgery. She smiled. There was no sister. There was no surgery. But there was 6 months of peace. And when I came back, they had learned to solve their own problems. Did they forgive you for lying? Did they apologize for using me? She countered. Some lies protect the liar. Others protect everyone involved by forcing truth to surface. 3 weeks into my financial independence, Kyle called with a new strategy. Not anger this time, not manipulation. Strategy. Mom, we need to have a family meeting, all of us, to clear the air. A family meeting. As if my decision to stop funding their lifestyle was a group project that required consensus. I don't think that's necessary, Kyle. It is necessary. The kids are confused. Madison feels terrible about any misunderstandings. We need to work this out like adults. Adults. The irony wasn't lost on me. Adults managed their own finances. Adults didn't have family meetings to discuss why grandma stopped paying their bills, but curiosity won. I wanted to see how they planned to handle this confrontation. I wanted to witness the performance they had prepared to convince me that I was the problem. Fine. Saturday at 2 o'clock. But we meet here, in my apartment. Mom, our house has more space. Here, my space, my rules. That Saturday, they arrived like an invasion force. Kyle, Madison, Claire, and 10-year-old Tommy, who looked confused and uncomfortable in clothes that were clearly designated as visiting grandma attire. Madison was carrying flowers, grocery store daisies that probably cost more than my weekly coffee budget but looked like an afterthought purchased in the parking lot. Edith, these are for you, Madison said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that felt manufactured. I want you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done for our family. Appreciate. Past tense. As if my usefulness was a concluded chapter rather than an ongoing relationship. They arranged themselves on my small couch and chairs like actors taking their marks. Madison had positioned herself where the afternoon light would hit her face most flatteringly. Kyle sat with his hands folded in the posture of someone prepared to be reasonable. The children flanked them like beautiful accessories, Claire checking her phone discreetly, while Tommy swung his legs and looked around my apartment as if seeing it for the first time. Mom, Kyle began, we want to start by saying we love you. Here it was. The prepared speech. The coordinated effort to make me feel guilty for protecting my own resources. We know there have been some misunderstandings lately, Madison continued, her voice practiced and smooth. And we want to clear the air. We never intended to make you feel excluded or unappreciated. You uninvited me to dinner via text message while spending my money at an expensive restaurant, I said calmly. What part of that was a misunderstanding? Madison's smile flickered. That night was... Kyle had a rough day at work. We thought it would be better to keep things low-key. Low-key at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse? Kyle shifted uncomfortably. Mom, we can explain. I don't want explanations. I want acknowledgement. I want you to say the words, we used you. The silence was deafening. Claire looked up from her phone, suddenly interested in a conversation she had been ignoring. Tommy stopped swinging his legs. We didn't use you, Madison said, her voice losing its artificial sweetness. We're family. Family helps each other. You helped us because you wanted to, because you love us. And how did you help me? Another silence. This one longer, more uncomfortable. We included you in our lives, Kyle said weakly. When? Name one time in the past year when you invited me somewhere that didn't require me to pay for it. Kyle looked at Madison. Madison looked at the floor. Claire was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. We invited you to Tommy's birthday party, Madison tried, where I paid for the cake, the decorations, and the entertainment. That wasn't an invitation. That was an assignment. Tommy spoke up for the first time. Grandma, did you really pay for my birthday party? Madison shot him a sharp look. Tommy, that's not... Yes, sweetheart. I paid for your party. And your sister's party. And your school supplies. And your piano lessons. And most of the food you've eaten for the past 3 years. Tommy looked confused. But Mom said you wanted to pay for stuff because it made you happy. Did it make me happy? I asked him directly. Did I look happy when I was writing checks? He thought about it with the serious concentration of a child trying to solve a puzzle. You looked tired, and sometimes sad. But Mom said you were sad because Grandpa died, not because of money. Madison's face was turning red. Tommy, that's enough. But I wasn't done. I went to my bedroom and returned with a box I had prepared for this moment. Bank statements, receipts, canceled checks, a paper trail of exploitation that covered 25 years. $174,000, I said, setting the box on my coffee table like evidence in a trial. That's how much I've given you over the years. Not including the house down payment, which was another $110,000. Kyle's face went pale. Mom, we never asked you to keep track. You never asked me to keep track because you never intended to pay any of it back. I opened the box and pulled out a handful of receipts. Hawaii vacation, $12,000. San Francisco work conference, $4,000. Madison's car down payment, $15,000. Claire's orthodontist, $8,000. With each item I listed, I placed a receipt on the table. The pile grew like an accusation that couldn't be ignored or explained away. And in return, what did I get? Text message cancellations, excluded from family photos, eating alone on holidays while you celebrated together with money I provided. Madison stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're not going to sit here and be attacked by what? By facts? By receipts? By the truth you've been avoiding for years? You're being manipulative, Madison snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. You're using guilt to control us. This is emotional blackmail. The accusation hit like a slap. Emotional blackmail. As if protecting my own resources was a form of abuse, rather than a form of self-preservation. No, I said, standing up to face her. Emotional blackmail is what you did when you used my grandchildren to make me feel guilty for setting boundaries. Emotional blackmail is when you make someone feel selfish for wanting to be included in the life they're funding. We never excluded you on purpose, Kyle said desperately. It just happened. Things got busy. Life got complicated. Life got expensive, I corrected. And I was convenient. A silent partner who never demanded equity in the business of your happiness. Claire, who had been quiet through most of this confrontation, suddenly spoke up. Is this why you're not paying for my college? The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. This was the real reason for the family meeting. Not reconciliation, not apology. College tuition. Are you planning to include me in your college experience? I asked her. Or am I just supposed to write checks and watch from a distance while you build a life I'm not invited to share? Claire looked genuinely confused, as if the idea that relationships required reciprocity had never occurred to her. I would call you. Sometimes. I sat back down, suddenly feeling every one of my 77 years. Claire, do you know what I wanted to be when I was your age? What? A teacher. I wanted to teach art to children. But I got married instead, had your father, and spent my life supporting other people's dreams while mine collected dust. Do you know what I'm doing now? She shook her head. I'm learning to paint. At 77 years old, I'm finally pursuing the dream I set aside to raise a family that apparently doesn't think I'm worth including. Madison was gathering her purse, her face set in hard lines. We don't have to listen to this. Kyle, we're leaving. No, Kyle said quietly. We're not. For the first time in the entire confrontation, he looked directly at me. Really looked at me. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we made you feel invisible. I'm sorry we took advantage of your generosity. I'm sorry we forgot that loving someone means including them, not just using them. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a beginning. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment surrounded by the scattered evidence of 25 years of one-sided love. The receipts lay across my coffee table like autumn leaves, each one representing a choice I had made to prioritize their happiness over my own dignity. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt clean. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Robert died. I opened a bottle of wine. Not the cheap cooking wine I sometimes used for recipes, but an actual bottle of Merlot I had bought that afternoon just because I wanted to celebrate something. What was I celebrating? The end of being taken for granted. The beginning of being worth my own investment. I poured myself a glass and sat by my window, watching the Chicago skyline light up in the distance. The city looked different from my perspective now. Not like a place where I was forgotten, but like a place full of possibilities I had never allowed myself to explore. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose that felt foreign after decades of reactive living. Instead of waiting for someone else to need something from me, I made a list of things I needed for myself, a proper winter coat. Mine was 15 years old and held together with safety pins in places Madison would never see. A subscription to the art magazine I had been reading at the library. A weekend trip somewhere I had never been. A therapist, because 77 years of putting everyone else first had left me unsure of who I was when no one needed anything from me. I started with the coat. The department store felt like foreign territory. I hadn't shopped for anything significant in years, always finding reasons why Kyle's family needed things more urgently than I did. The saleswoman was probably 30 years younger than me, with perfectly styled hair and the kind of confidence that comes from never having had to choose between your own needs and your child's wants. "Are you looking for anything specific?" she asked. "Something warm. Something that makes me feel valuable." She looked at me for a moment, really looked at me, and something in her expression softened. "I think I have exactly what you need." The coat she brought was beautiful. Deep burgundy wool with a classic cut that flattered my figure instead of hiding it. It cost more than I had spent on myself in a year. But when I looked in the fitting room mirror, I saw a woman worth protecting from the cold. "It's perfect," I said. And for the first time in decades, I meant it. The therapist came next, Dr. Sarah Martinez, a woman in her 50s who specialized in late-life transitions and family dynamics. Her office was warm and comfortable, filled with plants and soft lighting that made difficult conversations feel less threatening. "Tell me about yourself, Edith," she said during our first session. "Not about your role as a mother or grandmother. Tell me about you." The question stopped me cold. I'm not sure what you mean. What do you enjoy? What makes you laugh? What are you curious about? When you're alone with your thoughts, what do you think about?" I sat in her comfortable chair and realized I couldn't answer any of those questions. I had been someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone's financial resource for so long that I had forgotten I was also Edith, a person with preferences and dreams and a right to happiness that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I said slowly, I think I'd like to find out who I am when no one needs anything from me." Dr. Martinez smiled. "That sounds like a wonderful adventure." The weekend trip was my first act of pure rebellion against a lifetime of serving others first. I chose Galena, Illinois, a small historic town about 3 hours from Chicago that I had read about in a travel magazine someone had left at the dentist's office. It wasn't exotic or expensive, but it was mine. A choice I made based on my own curiosity, rather than someone else's expectations. I booked a room at a bed and breakfast that probably cost what I used to send Kyle for grocery money each week. The guilt tried to surface. That familiar voice reminding me that this money could be helping someone else. But I pushed it down. I was someone else. I was helping me. The inn was everything I had imagined. A Victorian house with creaky floors and antique furniture, and a hostess named Betty, who treated every guest like a long-lost friend. My room had a view of the Mississippi River and a clawfoot tub that I filled with lavender bath salts and used twice in one day just because I could. I spent the weekend walking through antique shops, eating meals I didn't have to cook or clean up after, and talking to strangers who knew nothing about my complicated family dynamics. I was just Edith, a woman from Chicago who liked watercolor painting and was learning to travel alone. At a small art gallery, I bought my first real painting, not a print or a reproduction, but an original watercolor by a local artist, a scene of the river at sunset that captured something I couldn't name but desperately needed to own. It cost $200, money that the old me would have sent to Kyle for some emergency that probably wasn't really an emergency. The new me hung it above my couch when I got home and looked at it every morning while I drank coffee that I bought based on taste rather than price. 3 weeks after the family confrontation, Claire appeared at my door alone, not with her parents, not bearing messages from Madison, just Claire with red-rimmed eyes and the kind of nervous energy that comes from working up courage to do something scary. "Grandma, can I come in? I mean, really come in? Not for money or because my parents sent me, but because I want to talk to you?" I made us tea in my good china, the set Robert and I had received as a wedding gift that I had been saving for special occasions that never seemed special enough. We sat at my kitchen table, 2 women separated by 61 years, but connected by blood, and, I hoped, something deeper than financial obligation. "I've been thinking about what you said," Claire began, stirring honey into her tea with the nervous precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. About how we never invited you to things unless we needed you to pay for them. And I realized, I don't actually know you. What do you mean? I know you're my grandmother. I know you give us money. I know you make good cookies and always remember our birthdays. But I don't know what you like to do for fun. I don't know what your favorite movie is or what you wanted to be when you grew up, or what makes you happy. The honesty was devastating and hopeful at the same time. Do you want to know those things? I asked. Yes. I want to know you. The real you. Not just the you that exists to help us. So I told her about my watercolor classes and how mixing blue and yellow to make green felt like magic. About the book I was reading about women who started new careers after 70. About my plans to visit Ireland next spring. Finally taking the trip Robert and I had dreamed about before Kyle's failed business consumed our travel fund. Claire listened with the attention I hadn't received from anyone in my family for years. She asked questions, laughed at my stories, and shared things about herself that went beyond requesting money for activities. She was thinking about studying social work in college. She wanted to help elderly people who felt invisible and forgotten. She had broken up with her boyfriend because he only called when he wanted help with his homework. She had been accepted to 3 colleges and was choosing based on programs rather than prestige. I've been watching you these past few weeks, she said as we finished our second cup of tea. You seem different, happier, more like yourself, if that makes sense. I am more like myself. I'm finally learning who I am when I'm not constantly worried about what everyone else needs. I'm sorry we made you worried all the time. I'm sorry we forgot that you're a person with feelings and dreams and not just a bank account with a heartbeat. The phrase was so precise, so accurate, that I laughed out loud. Where did you hear that expression? I made it up. But it's true, isn't it? That's how we treated you. Yes, I said. But you're here now, and you're asking the right questions. That's what matters. When she left that evening, Claire hugged me for real. Not the obligatory embrace of a child fulfilling an adult's expectations, but the genuine affection of someone who had found a relationship worth maintaining. For the first time in 25 years, I felt like someone's grandmother instead of someone's resource. 6 months later, I'm sitting in a cafe in Dublin, Ireland, watching rain streak down windows that frame a view Robert and I dreamed about for 30 years. My watercolor sketchbook is open on the table beside my coffee, filled with amateur attempts to capture the green rolling hills and ancient stone walls that seem to hold centuries of stories. I'm not alone, but I'm not with family either. I'm with Helen and Margaret, 2 women I met in my watercolor class who decided that turning 70 was an excellent reason to finally see the world. We call ourselves the Late Bloomer Brigade, and we've planned trips to Scotland next spring and maybe France in the fall. Helen is 81 and just published her first poetry collection. Margaret is 74 and started learning the violin after her husband died. We're proof that life doesn't end when your children stop needing you. It begins. My phone buzzes with a text from Claire. She sends me pictures from college now. Not requests for money, but moments she wants to share. Today, it's a photo of her volunteer work at a senior center, helping elderly residents write letters to family members who have forgotten to visit. Thinking of you, Grandma. Hope Ireland is as beautiful as you dreamed. Kyle calls occasionally now. Our conversations are stilted, careful, but they're conversations rather than requests. He's learning to solve his own problems, and Madison is working full-time for the first time since Claire was born. They lost the house, couldn't afford the mortgage without my monthly contributions. But they found a smaller place that fits their actual income rather than their aspirations. I sent Claire a graduation gift when she finished high school, but it wasn't money. It was a watercolor painting I had done of the sunrise from my apartment window, along with a note that said, "For the woman who saw me when I thought I was invisible, paint your own sunrises, sweetheart. Don't wait for permission to be happy." She wrote back that she hung it in her dorm room and tells people her grandmother is an artist. An artist. At 77, I finally have an identity that belongs entirely to me. The savings account that used to drain away in monthly installments to my family's lifestyle has grown steadily. I've opened an investment account, something I was always told was too complicated for me to understand. Turns out, I understand money quite well when I'm spending it on myself instead of subsidizing other people's irresponsibility. I bought a new car last month. Not a luxury vehicle, but a reliable Honda that's actually this decade's model with air conditioning that works, and a heating system that doesn't sound like it's dying. The old me would have driven my 15-year-old car until it literally fell apart, because Kyle needed the money more than I needed comfortable transportation. The new me believes I deserve a car that starts every morning without a prayer. Dr. Martinez and I still meet monthly. We've moved past survival mode into what she calls thriving therapy. Sessions focused on building the life I want rather than escaping the life I was trapped in. She helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for my adult son's financial success, that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being for theirs, and that saying no isn't selfish. It's necessary. You were never the problem, Edith, she told me during one of our sessions. You were the solution to everyone else's problems, and they became addicted to that solution. Recovery required you to stop enabling their dependency. I've started dating. At 77, I've started dating. His name is Frank. He's a widower who volunteers at the animal shelter where I adopted a cat named Monet. He's kind and funny and treats me like someone worth courting rather than someone useful to have around. We go to museums together, share books, and have conversations that last for hours without anyone asking me for money. Frank knows about Kyle and Madison and the years I spent funding a life I wasn't invited to share. He listens without judgment and sometimes shares stories about his own adult children who had to learn to appreciate him as a person rather than just a resource. The hardest lesson for parents, he said over dinner last week, is that our children's happiness is their responsibility, not ours. We can love them, support them emotionally, be there when they need advice, but we can't live their lives for them, and we sure as hell can't buy their love. The apartment I thought was too small for my loneliness is perfect for my independence. I've redecorated with colors I chose, furniture I bought, art I selected because it makes me smile. The walls are covered with my watercolor paintings, amateur works that get better each month and remind me daily that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. I sleep through the night now. No anxiety dreams about unpaid bills or family emergencies that somehow became my emergencies. No more checking my bank balance with dread or calculating whether I can afford groceries after sending money to people who forgot to say thank you. The peace is extraordinary. Last week I received an invitation to Tommy's 11th birthday party. Not a request for me to fund the party, but an actual invitation to attend a celebration Kyle and Madison were managing themselves. I went, bringing a thoughtful gift I could afford, and for the first time in years, I enjoyed a family gathering. Madison and I aren't friends, but we're polite. She's learned that I'm not a bottomless well of financial assistance, and I've learned that I don't need her approval to exist. Kyle seems lighter somehow, less stressed now that he's living within his means rather than constantly managing the gap between his desires and his income. Tommy hugged me when I arrived and asked about my trip to Ireland, genuinely interested in my adventures rather than obligated to be polite. Claire, home from college for the weekend, showed me photos from her social work internship and told me about the elderly woman she's helping reconnect with her estranged daughter. She reminds me of you, Claire said. Strong and kind, and worth fighting for. Worth fighting for. I never thought I'd hear those words applied to me. As the afternoon wound down and I prepared to leave, Kyle walked me to my car. We stood in his driveway, the driveway of a house he could actually afford, and he looked at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes for years. Respect. Mom, he said quietly, I know it's probably too late to say this, but I'm proud of you. Proud of the way you stood up for yourself. Proud of the life you're building. I'm sorry it took losing your support for us to learn to value your presence. It wasn't too late. It's never too late for truth. The most important lesson I've learned at 77 is this. Love isn't supposed to make you disappear. Real love sees you, includes you, celebrates you. Real love doesn't require you to shrink yourself to make room for other people's happiness. Real love doesn't have a price tag, and it sure as hell doesn't come with an invoice. I spent 25 years believing that my worth was measured by my usefulness, that love meant giving until I had nothing left to give. I thought being needed was the same as being loved, and I nearly disappeared completely trying to earn a place at a table where I was only welcome when I was paying the check. But here's what I know now. You can't buy love, and you can't love someone into loving you back. You can only love yourself enough to require that love be mutual, respectful, and genuine. I am 77 years old, and I am finally free. Have you ever found yourself giving so much of yourself to family that you forgot you deserve to receive love in return? Have you ever been made to feel selfish for wanting to be included in the life you were funding? Tell me in the comments. Your story matters, and you're not alone in this struggle. If this message resonated with you, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the most important words we can hear are that our worth isn't determined by what we can give to others, but by the simple fact that we exist and deserve love just as we are. Let's make sure this message reaches someone who needs to hear it today.